Cold Daio's placement in the Dragonball manga is one that many tout as wasted potential, or that he only existed to further hype up Trunks, and cause many to compare his limited role to Dabra, as those who saw my video on the latter, or anyone who's read the title can tell though. I'm here to explain why this comes from misunderstandings, and that Cold succeeded in the very simple narrative purpose Toriyama set out for him, a means of fleshing out Frieza's background further, without derailing the plot. To establish what I mean by this, we'll take the first reference to him, when Frieza mentions him on Namek. We'll address the plural part later. This single line recontextualizes how Frieza is viewed, as him being some sole entity above everyone else in his path, was something that could seem underdeveloped if viewing his role on Namek alone. By introducing not just the idea of a parent, but that they could do some damage to his true form, we immediately get a great idea of Frieza's species and their strength. At the same time, it doesn't contradict what Frieza has solidified in being sure of his position as strongest in the universe. It's with Cold's physical introduction, though, that we see layers of Frieza's character through their interactions that we weren't aware of before, as Frieza's childish mannerisms, such as referring to Cold as Papa, and Cold's own evil intent in viewing it as easier to destroy Earth from space, or touting the strength of their clan, changes how we viewed the evil of Frieza's actions. No longer those of simply someone using their abilities to exert authority, and now someone who was raised by their father to uphold these values. This was also one of the few good parts about the flashback segment in the Super Broly film, in further reiterating that Frieza was a spoiled child, whose father let him have complete control purely on his natural strength, with it being made clear the Saiyans had more amicable careers under Cold's rule. In short, one of the top contenders for most evil villain in Dragon Ball owes a lot of that to how his father raised him. It's after Frieza is cut out of the plot, quite literally, that Cold's character is fleshed out a bit on his own. What really sells that Cold is the origin of Frieza's nature is how his immediate reaction upon his son's demise is to persuade Trunks to take Frieza's place, rather than beg for his life or retreat as many would. Not only does this present Cold as collected in a difficult situation, but his lack of reaction at losing his own son beyond shock, then replaced by opportunism, show how his care for Frieza is purely as an extension of his own ideals, and adds to Frieza's reasoning as to why it was best to not bring him back in Super. This further ties into parallels with Vegeta, and how he has a collectivistic view on family accomplishment, with the difference being Vegeta went through enough character growth to see his son as more than a tool. A very relevant decision for the Cell Arc's prologue, with how big of a role father-son dynamics play in the narrative for this specific story arc. There's then his plan to disarm Trunks, when chalking up his feat to purely his sword. Some would argue this is where Cold seems quite stupid, but it's honestly a logical conclusion to come to from where he stands. Imbuing one's ki in or around a weapon isn't something anyone in Frieza's army seems to do, and these are a group notable for caring more about the raw numbers their ki can be measured in than refining how it's used. It also goes overlooked how much of a force multiplier the right weapon can be, when considering Yajirobe's katana could slice clean through Vegeta's armor. That took far greater ki than what Yajirobe can dish out to perform similar damage to it, so Cold wasn't exactly out of his mind thinking Trunks' sword was that good, and more lacking examples to the contrary. That tangent aside, this event shows Cold as a calculating, opportunistic, and selfish individual. This helps answer a question some have on what exactly did Cold bring to the table in Cell's composition, and the answer is the refinement of these traits. People tend to chalk first form Cell's calculating attitude up to Piccolo alone, though it's true of their their shared ability to play the long game. It's when viewing the examples of how Piccolo displayed opportunism and strategy up until his cells were harvested that we see there's honestly more of an overlap between how Cell exploits weaknesses with Cold's approach rather than Piccolo's, such as both having the strategy of depriving their opponent of their biggest strength, or being more willing than the others within Cell to get by with words rather than actions. In other words, the Cell question can be quickly answered with the side-by-side comparison. The other role Cold accomplishes is aided in Dragon Ball's world building through the history he adds when expanding beyond the original manga, something that became an inevitability with Dragon Ball's success. His implementation helps flesh out Frieza's species as a group, with their own ideals and unique attributes when comparing the father to the son, rather than Frieza being a lone entity. This aspect provides a good opportunity to go over some misconceptions surrounding Cold. Perhaps the biggest one is the idea that he can transform, or that he's in his second form, something not backed up by any official Japanese material, with Toriyama and Oishi going as far as to outright refute the idea of him hiding greater strength than Frieza, and the Sparken or Tenkaichi series confirming Frieza modelled his second form after his father's appearance. Not only does this make far more sense than Cold for some reason never bothering against Trunks or future Goku, but the whole reason for Frieza's first three forms is to control his power better than his true form, which Cold seems to have no issue with. The lack of necessity to do so also shown Cold's greater experience without needing to extrapolate on it. The video games do a surprisingly good job in displaying this through the appearances of more of the species similar to Frieza's different forms being unique aspects to each individual rather than a uniform transformation of the race, the one exception being the golden form. Some may point to Frost, but that's not a good example when he is a parallel Frieza, and even then, it doesn't seem as though he has an identical second form, and even refers to his supposed third form by a different name. Promotional material even going as far as to label his assault form as his second form. What the manga shows along with Toriyama's own words has far more weight. The other misconception is information surrounding Frieza's parentage, with some translations implying there must be a mother. The wording within the original Japanese, however, is far more vague, and Toriyama's equally vague wording of Frieza being born of Cold alone lends credence towards their species reproducing asexually, and merely being referred to as male, much like Namek's. I'd lean towards the latter. When taken into account, material showing a wider variety of the species don't show any females. A final misconception to cover is their species name, and to cut to the chase, they have never been referred to as anything other than Frieza Ichizoku or Frieza race in the original Japanese. Xenoverse referring to them as frost demons is exclusive to the localization, with them only referred to as Frieza no Ichizoku in the Japanese audio, and I honestly don't know how those exposed to the dub ever thought of them as Arcosians when what those are in the dub look like this. Was that all an excuse to squeeze a segment on misconceptions in without making it its own video? Perhaps. But the point is that all this fleshing out of the species as a major part of Dragon Ball's world was through Cold showing Frieza as far from the only one of his kind, and presenting a contrast between them. It's through this that Cold's limited role in the manga still helped further flesh out Frieza as a character, provide greater understanding of his species without ruining the mystique, and added subtle elements to Cell's characterization, along with furthering the arc's thematic display of fatherhood. Thank you for having watched through this analysis. Be sure to check out my older ones, subscribe for more, and request any topic you'd like to see covered. For instance, you may want to see this character analysis on Frieza. That goes well with this video.